solder the wiring harness adapter to the wiring harness that comes with the stereo, and I have pre-cut 13 heat shrink tubes and put them on these wires here so that when I'm done I can seal the connection. I've also got my diagram here, tells me what wire goes where. I'm wearing gloves mainly because it seems like sometimes when you're twisting the wires together with bare hands, they don't seem to solder as cleanly as they do if they're completely clean. Obviously there's a lot of different theories on soldering wires like this. I typically try to twist them together. As best you can. Clean it with a little flux. The soldering iron, I haven't done that yet. Just get a little solder on there. And then wipe it off with the damp sponge, and then you're ready to go. So when you're soldering wires, you want to heat the wire, not the solder, and let it melt in. There are lots of soldering videos on YouTube. I'll talk about, this is a 6337 tin to lead solder. You see a lot of 6040s, also another popular one. This one has a little lower melting point, which makes it a little quicker to solder with. So now that's cooled down, if I was only doing the one wire, I would slide the heat shrink over that, and there's two ways you can do that. You can do it with like a lighter or a heat gun. I usually use a lighter, it seems like it's quicker. I'm going to try to do several of these before I worry about heat shrinking them. Okay, I've got all the wires soldered. I'm just going to show you how to basically take the heat shrink tube over where you've soldered, and then just apply some heat to it. And it will shrink around, seal that up, just like that. So I'm going to do that with all the other ones. Again, I'm going to do that off camera. This has probably been the toughest and most frustrating stereo install I've ever done in my life. Looking at the wiring harnesses, wiring diagrams, Google, just driving me crazy. I have the actual Chevrolet shop manual for this vehicle, as well as one of those aftermarket how to fix up your car books, and I really, even looking at the wiring diagrams in the Chevrolet shop manual, had a hard time figuring out how the stereo is exactly wired. Anyway, I found this, and this actually lets me hook up the stereo. You'll notice it says it's not for OnStar. I don't have my OnStar hooked up. I haven't used it in 10 years or more. So I'm guessing part of the reason I was struggling on this stereo install is because the OnStar system goes through the factory radio, and so that's why there was that extra connector. So I've got this stereo hooked up with this interface. I'm going to pull it back out here in a minute and finish up some other stuff on it, but it is working. However, the radio antenna does not connect to it. Apparently there's an adapter you have to buy for General Motors. So kind of pisses you off when stuff is not universal. I've never had to buy a radio adapter in a vehicle before. Anyway, this works. Unfortunately, this stereo comes with absolutely no instructions whatsoever, so I've had to figure out things just by trial and error. See how the adapter works. This plugs into the factory harness. They include this, which supposedly is required to have all your chimes and warnings and God knows what else. So you see I've soldered all those connections there. This plugs into the back of the radio when it's in the car. And then you see there are 5 wires for this radio that are not dealt with in this adapter. So I'm going to have to figure out, I can tell you, parking is probably looking for a ground whenever the parking brake is on. Reverse is looking for a hot when you're in reverse. So this is the one I'm going to have to solder in the car that connects to the wire that goes to the backup cam. This one I'm going to try to find in the car where the ground is for the parking brake. If not, I may just wire it to ground with a switch in between it so that I can manually activate it. The one that's labeled ANT, I may need to test it and see. I'm guessing, and this is just a guess, again there's no instructions, that this wire may turn hot whenever the radio's on, and that would trigger in cars that have a power antenna, but that may not be what this does. The last two, say key 1 and key 2, these I believe are the steering wheel control wires, and I'll just have to figure out what's the best way to utilize those. You can take the brackets off of your new stereo, line them up with the brackets, try to find the least amount of drilling that you're going to have to do, and then color in the parts that you're going to have to remove. And that should also work as far as making your bracket match. So I'm just going to try to line that up in the middle and then color in the parts that need to be removed. And then I've also marked them passenger and driver, because obviously you drill this and then you may not remember which one was which. So, but that way I'll put it back together. Like I said, just make sure you're paying attention to the orientation of the radio, top to bottom, left to right. I made some more fine tuning on the bracket to see we're definitely getting closer to being ideally lined up, and also closer to wishing I'd have just put another factory radio in here and not had to mess with all this. So we're getting closer. It at least appears that it would actually be usable from this point. So I can continue to adjust the bracket and try to move it over a little bit towards the driver's side by moving the holes. Or I could live with it for now and just put a piece of black plastic down the side here, basically behind this piece of trim, attach it to there, and that way when it's in, no, it wouldn't look factory, but it would look better than it's looking right now. I don't know if I want to try to move the radio out. I can do that just by adjusting where it is on the bracket. The pro to doing that would be these knobs would be a little easier to get to. The con is it would be sticking out. I don't know if you ever want stuff sticking out, but like I said, it might make it a little easier to use if it's not quite flush with the dash. Alright, the test fitting is basically complete. I have it pretty much where it's going to end up being. I may make a few final little tweaks on it, but nothing major. Just eyeballing it from here, it looks, and I didn't notice this when I was in the driver's seat, but it looks like it's a little bit tilted toward the roof. Not significantly, but that could affect visibility. So I'll have to decide if I need to tilt it more down or if it's good where it is. Like I said, I didn't notice that when I was in the driver's seat. But anyway, it's pretty much where it is. So I'm going to pull the, it's not hooked up right now, so I'm going to pull the trim back off and show you how to make some of the final wire connections, and then we'll be able to bolt it in and should be ready to go. The next step is attaching the rear camera power activation, and because of the way they wire this, it's not really practical to solder, because you would have to solder it to there and then you'd have no ability to disconnect this. In other words, you'd have this whole harness connected to an RCA wire that's going to the back of your vehicle. So instead of soldering, I'm going to crimp, and I'll also use this for how to crimp wires video later on. Crimping just involves basically taking these little crimp connectors and putting them on there. This is going to be hot when the reverse lights are on, so because of that I'm going to put the shielded one on here. That way, if for whatever reason that doesn't connect to ground and short something out, this will only be hot whenever it's connected to here, and this is hot. So this one can be exposed and it won't short anything out. Crimping is actually pretty easy. I don't normally like having this much wire coming off of there. So the thing to do is to cut this and then crimp. Alright, I've cut it about a ½ an inch roughly. Like I said, this side is not hot when it's in the vehicle, so I'm not worried about it being exposed. So you push the wire in there. You want to make sure that the wire tip can be seen there, and then you just crimp with your crimp tool. And I usually do 2 or 3 spots really tight on the metal there. You can kind of feel for where it is. And then I usually just do real light on the plastic there, so you don't break the plastic, but that way, so that creates a pretty solid connection. That's not likely to come off unless you really were trying. And then since this one is not stripped, I'm going to go ahead and strip it about a ½ an inch. And same thing on the crimp. That's connected, and that way when you're putting the radio in, you'll just connect those, spade connector, and then if you ever need to take it out, you just disconnect it. You don't have to cut any wires or resolder any wires. One that's labeled parking, it's going to be looking for a ground whenever to activate the where you can watch movies on the screen. Most people just bypass that. I mean, if you wanted to be technically correct, you'd wire that to your parking brake or something that senses that your vehicle's in park. I think what I want to do, I'm just going to wire this to a switch that the other side is grounded, and that way I can switch it to where it's connected to ground all the time and be able to watch the movie. And then if I find out that that's causing some other problem, like not being able to watch the backup camera or whatever, I'll have that switch where I can just switch it on and off as I need to. So that's what I'm going to do on that one. These key 1 and key 2, I'm going to actually have to do a little more research. The wiring diagram is really not all that helpful. It seems to just show that there's a single wire coming off of the steering wheel. So I don't know if something in the factory radio is able to translate perhaps multiple voltages on that wire to figure out whether you're doing volume up or down or some other button. And like I said, it doesn't seem that it's on the actual stereo connector. So I don't know if it goes through the one that was hooked up to the OnStar or if it's somewhere else. So that one's not going to be easy to figure out, but there's basically 2 that are supposed to be steering wheel control wires there. And then again, I may get lucky, I may find that green wire, I may hook this one up to it and it may work perfectly. But I'm probably not that lucky, so my guess is I'll be struggling with these last 2, but other than that, we're moving along. You'll see I closed off this one that says antenna. I don't think it's needed, but I didn't want to cut it completely and then find out later that it was somehow tied to something else. Like I said, my gut feeling is that's a power antenna activator. When you turn on the radio, it triggers a power antenna raise. You don't see those very often in vehicles anymore. I've attached the wire harness to the back of the unit, plugged it into the vehicle, so we're ready to bolt this in. I did not hook up the radio antenna because for some reason General Motors decided to have a different size than what's on the stereo, so I'm going to have to get an adapter. And I didn't mess with the steering wheel controls for now again, since I have to take this out anyway. But I wanted to at least get this back together so that the vehicle is drivable for now. It comes with a trim piece, and that should help hide some of the gapping around